Chapter 12. Flat Spins. There had been a few times in Taft's flying career when he thought he was going to die. This time, he was certain of it. The Spitfire ignored every frantic input he threw at it and continued in its flat spin toward the unforgiving Himalayan landscape below. He'd been in such a rush to get airborne that he'd completely forgotten his parachute, although he admitted wryly that with the G-forces pinning him into the seat, it would have been next to impossible to get the canopy open and climb out over the wing anyway. A flicker of movement caught his eye. To his left, the Hunter was still falling beside him, equally out of control. For a heartbeat, he wondered why the wing commander hadn't ejected, unless the ejection seat had failed too. Before he could dwell on it, a white flash strobed off his starboard side. Not a weapon this time, but the Astraeus, returning to the dome at enormous speed. The dome winked off, then on again as the craft re-entered the fort. For an instant, he couldn't be sure. Taft thought he saw the tiny figure of the collector leaping out and sprinting across the landing area, a vast square in the center of the Dutsong. Seconds bled away. The ground surged closer. The altimeter unwound past 1,000 feet. Taft exhaled, resigned to the inevitable. Then, the impossible happened. A vast portal, bigger than any they'd seen yet, opened directly beneath the two aircraft. The world inverted, blurred, and snapped back into focus. Suddenly, Taft was no longer plummeting toward rock and ice, but gliding in calm air above Cox's Bazaar. The spin was gone. The Spitfire was in a level, steady glide. His altitude had changed too. 10,000 feet. Comfortable, controlled. The Hunter floated alongside him. That wasn't the only change the collector had made. His radio crackled. "Taft, I don't know about you, but I appear to be suddenly bingo fuel." Taft glanced at his gauge, tapped it twice, and grimaced. "Ditto, sir." The wing commander raised a hand in the cockpit and gave him the unmistakable done signal. "We've no choice but to land," he said. "Right away, no wasted maneuvers." Both aircraft rolled into a steep descending left turn out over the water, the Hunter leading. It bled energy faster and needed more runway, so it would take point. The Spitfire tucked in behind, Taft keeping a tight visual on the Hunter's tail. The Hunter dropped at 3,000 to 4,000 feet per minute, the Spitfire 1,000 slower. Both aimed to level at 2,000 feet abeam the coastline. They arced inland in a wide, graceful right-hand turn, the Spitfire staying slightly inside the curve, using its tighter turning circle to hold position. They crossed directly over the pier where, less than a week earlier, the Bangla had set sail. Rolling out on a downwind leg parallel to the runway, they descended to 1,200 feet. The Hunter held a steady 180 knots, the Spitfire trailing 20 knots behind. They were set for the break. Taft caught a glimpse of upturned faces along the flight line, base personnel in sky blue pilot overalls, and could almost hear the professional commentary unfolding below. The Hunter broke first, forming a descending 180-degree turn onto final. It had to land first, heavier, faster, needing more runway. 15 seconds later, the Spitfire broke. Both aircraft were now committed. Almost no fuel, no overshoots, no second chances. The Hunter touched down at 140 knots, speed bleeding away as the wing commander braked hard and swung slightly inland to clear space. Seconds later, the Spitfire settled onto the sand behind it. The Merlin coughed twice and died. Taft slid back the canopy, climbed out over the wing, and dropped to the beach beside his commanding officer. "Well, that was fun, sir," he said, straight-faced. The wing commander nodded toward the unmistakable shape of one of the robotic handlers trundling toward them, ready to tow the aircraft back to their places on the flight line. "Let's hope it wasn't the last fun for some time," he replied as they strode up the beach toward the gathering crowd of pilots and base personnel. Following the excitement of the previous days, the Bangla's final leg to Shershong seemed strangely quiet, almost surreal, as the Chot left the lower stretches of the river system and entered the narrow, steep-sided valleys of the lower Himalayas. They had beached the boat at the Manas confluence near Kochugaon, and were now passing between the sheer walls of the Manas Gorge, the river narrowing sharply as the cliffs rose like silent, ancient, monolithic giants on either side. For the first time, Ket and her whole crew felt very small. As they pushed north, the gorge began to change. Rod felt the uncanny sensation that the gorge itself was beginning to breathe. The walls that had hemmed them in for hours slowly pulled back, widening just enough for sunlight to spill through. The river, once a tight ribbon of white water, broadened into long, glassy pools between boulder gardens, with mist clinging to the upper cliffs and drifting like slow smoke. Rode noticed that the subtropical forest had given way to mixed pine and rhododendron clinging to impossible ledges far above them. Bursts of red and pink blossoms broke the green monotony, and fallen petals drifted on the water like tiny boats, a Bhutanese armada escorting them north. The air grew cooler, thinner, cleaner. The sky deepened to a sharper blue. Snow appeared on distant ridgelines, faint at first, then unmistakable. As they made their final approach to Sheshong, the gorge finally opened into a high, bowl-shaped valley ringed by forested slopes. The river slowed, meandering through gravel bars and willow thickets. But where, in their own timeline, the settlement would have appeared as a cluster of stone buildings and prayer walls, smoke rising from hearths and the mountains towering behind. Here there was only open riverbank. The crew beached the Bangla on a wide gravel fan, the water whispering around its hull, and prepared to make their final camp of the riverine part of their odyssey. Back at the base, the wing commander had convened an urgent pilots' meeting to share what he and Taff had seen at Trong Sa Dudzong. His first instinct had been to limit it to the military pilots, but he'd then had second thoughts and included the civilian pilots and co-pilots as well as the shuttle crew. Over 20 men and women, the majority in pilots' sky blue overalls, some in red, crowded into the base's seldom-used squadron briefing room. An excited buzz filled the space, along with a faint, barely concealed jealousy that two of their number had actually been airborne that afternoon. Also present were Angus McRae, the second most senior scientist at the base, and of course the second Homo Superior, Orion. The wing commander stepped up to the lectern, clearing his throat. The hubbub died instantly. So, as you know, Taff and I happened to be in the right place at the right time to take our kites up and have a look at the collector's lair this afternoon. Okay for some, the F-18 pilot muttered to his neighbor, the F-35 driver, who stifled a chuckle. The wing commander shot them both a frosty look before continuing. He outlined their approach to Trong Sa Dudzong, their observation of the hypersonic strike on what was clearly a force field-protected base hidden within the ancient Bhutanese fort. He finished by describing how the collector had used the Astraeus to destroy what must have been a suborbital platform delivering the rods, and then how he'd then saved both himself and Taff from certain death. From splattering bits of us and plain all over the Himalayas, as he dryly put it. The F-18 pilot raised a hand. Yes, Chuck, said the wing commander. Does this mean that all our planes are now operational again, sir? The lank 9Y Texan asked in his usual laconic style. Sadly not, said Taff, turning in his seat to address the room. The collector made sure we both arrived above Cox's bingo fuel, and we noticed that both aircraft's controls were locked again after we'd pulled off the landing. A respectful silence followed as the professional pilots took a moment to appreciate the skill required to land from 10,000 feet with practically empty tanks. The wing commander resumed, ticking off points on his fingers. So now we know several things for sure. 1. Our 22nd century friend's information about the location of the collector's base was spot on. 2. He's in possession of technology exceeding what Orion here says is available in her time, namely the force field. And 3. We're not the only ones with an issue with him. He paused. The scientist spoke next. And 4, we don't know the nature or intent of his enemy. The enemy of our enemy may not be our friend. If whoever they are succeeds in defeating him, we could be facing an even worse, possibly terminal threat. After all, apart from the initial abduction, the collector has shown no hostile intent towards us whatsoever. Chuck raised his hand again. So where do we go from here, then, sir? The wing commander sighed. Well, we're all grounded again for the foreseeable future. So I guess the next play is in the hands of the away team. He glanced toward Orion. Cass has listened in to the entire meeting, she confirmed, one finger pressed to her temple. They set off on foot tomorrow morning and will brief us again when they reach the site of the fort. At Sheshong, Cass dropped his finger from his temple and finished relaying the meeting to the others gathered around the campfire. Ket stood and stretched her back. Looks like the ball's back in our court, she said. Behind her, the dark shapes of the Himalayas loomed against a star-strewn sky, guardians of otherworldly secrets, and the lofty stage upon which the next episode of their quest would unfold.